Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Reasonably Ad-lib. This is the second half of my long conversation with Matthew Swihart. You can find the first half as episode 6A, right before this episode 6B. Again, find us on Facebook. Our address is facebook.com/reasonablyadlib. You can talk to us via email. Our email is ralpodcast@gmail.com. And you can also find our show on iTunes Store. Just search for us at iTunes. Well, again, here is Matthew Swihart. You know, in the tuba world, there's always this, not really an argument, but you know, there are a lot of talks about which tuba to use at what occasion. And I have actually have a student talk to me about how come in the U.S. we always use C tubas and F tubas. And in Europe, they have more choices, as in, you know, they would, for orchestra stuff even, they would use a B-flat tubas or E-flat tuba. And I don't know if I have the right answer for that. A lot of times, the quick answer is, well, you know, C tubas is more easy, it's easier to control under different some circumstances. Any similar thing in the trumpet world in terms of, you know, things are different in different parts of the world?
Yeah, that was the big project. My first year there, especially in Detmold, was
Right.
I was trying to learn the Haydn concerto on the B flat rotary valve trumpet. So the rotary valve trumpet, you know, it's got the
Right.
valves similar to the French horn for listeners who maybe have never seen one. And now American orchestras use them. They'll use them. The main difference is that so you've got these heavier valves.
Right.
The valves are just physically heavier, and then the lead pipe goes straight into the valves instead of going around a tuning slide first. Like most of the length of the trumpet is on the far side of the valves,
Right.
rather than on the mouthpiece side of the valves. It's on the bell side of the valves. Most of the length of the.
Okay.
So that makes the horn, in some respects, it can be a little hard to control.
Right.
Maybe just for Americans, I don't know, because the other once I started to get really comfortable on it, I had to find a different mouthpiece setup, and
Right.
at one time while I was in Germany, I was playing piston trumpets, Baroque trumpets. Piston trumpets, rotary valve trumpets, and Baroque trumpets
At the same
every
time.
day. Like it was every day was part of my practice regimen.
Wow.
And the Baroque trumpet is actually much more mainstream in Germany than a performance student is likely at the good schools anyway to play Baroque trumpet as part of their program, while in the States that's not happening in many places at all.
Right.
And you know that gets to, you know, do the Germans play the way the Germans play because they spend time on the rotary trumpet? Like, are the distinct aspects of German brass style?
Yeah.
You know, do they? I think there's that chicken and egg thing going on where the fact that at some point they went with the rotary valve trumpet over the piston trumpet,
Right.
or that's formed their playing, and then their playing has formed has sort of secured that decision that the rotary valves are going to get used for everything that's not specifically French American or jazz oriented. You know, for a
Right.
pops concert they would play the pistons.
The pistons.
Even for probably Stravinsky, probably they would play the pistons probably for Stravinsky, maybe for Ravel. I mean, that gets to where in the States there were two different. Some orchestras in the States historically were made up of German or German-trained musicians, and some, like Boston, was a French-trained orchestra. You know, it was like with imported French musicians at one time.
Wow.
uh, I believe Chicago was more of a German orchestra. I know Cincinnati was. I remember that about when I was there doing my bachelor's. At some point, somebody was talking to me about the history of the orchestra. That was a German orchestra. So
Right.
we had those two traditions going on,
Right.
and so when I was in Germany, I kind of saw there was a hybrid thing going on with my teacher too, because he was trained in France, but had made his career in Germany.
Right.
Um,
This is going to be like crazily technical, maybe, but if our listeners are interested into looking into this, a piston trumpet is the one that you see most. I think I would say most of the time. I think most of the jazz trumpet players do that. Miles Davis, always with the B flat. So it's the valves actually, go up and down. Go. It's more like upright setup, right? Am I saying this
yeah,
correctly?
it's what you would think of as a
Yeah.
piston in terms of auto
Right.
mechanics
So
or
I
something.
think a lot of times when you tell people, okay, you say the word trumpet, the instrument that show up in their head would be the upright, the piston trumpet. The
Yeah, yeah,
safest bet to see a rotary trumpet is to hop on to wherever the YouTube and punch out a Berlin Philharmonic and look at some of the trumpets, and you'll see the rotary, which is kind of sideways in a way. Kind of it looks kind of odd, right? Well,
yeah.
odd to
You'll
us because we are so used to the other thing.
But the
So
ultimate length of the horn
right,
is the same uh, as the piston.
right,
So that's why you can have a trumpet in C or a trumpet in B flat.
right,
It can be either rotary or piston. It's still a trumpet in B flat or C. The rotaries are just have I think traditionally a heavier character to the sound.
right,
You could call it a darker character. Maybe a less, maybe a different attack. The articulation is a
right.
little different.
Uh,
They tend to have been sort of in the past at least pretty heavy instruments.
right.
With the bell had like a lot of them on the bell they'll have um, another layer of metal around the what do they use for that? Maybe it's nickel,
Wow.
and so that's a different color. And I when I was playing the rotaries, I got pretty comfortable on them. I mean, our Americans' impression is that they're harder to control the pitch, they're harder to
Right,
control
right,
in general, and I think that's partially because the Germans don't set the German and Austrian and Swiss built instruments. I don't know who else would build rotary.
like
They tend
Yamaha,
to
did they
they
do
don't
that?
they do. Yamaha makes them. I don't know that anybody plays them in Germany though,
Right,
because the rotary trumpets. The other big distinction is that they tend to be made by um, smaller shops.
right,
Maybe it requires more handwork or something.
right,
Yamaha and Bach, the American builders, just don't. They make. I don't even know if Bach makes one. Yamaha does make one,
right.
and that's a Japanese company, of course.
Yeah.
And I don't know that people play them that often. It's
Is
in
it?
Germany. You've got all these little artisan shops making these horns, so they're
I was
expensive and they're great instruments. Some
right.
of them.
I was actually going to ask you. You're saying the construction itself is the structure itself is different, as in air goes right into the valve instead
Mhm.
of in the rotary instead of the piston it go around first and then go into the valve.
Yeah,
Does it
there's
does it
one
make any
crook of. Mhm.
right? Does it make any difference in terms of the blowing? Uh,
It does and you got to have the mouthpiece adjusted to that as well
right,
because the lead pipe on the rotary is a lot shorter
right,
than the piston, and then there's more pipe on top of that, and that just creates some stability before it goes through the whole disturbance of the air that is the valves. Because the valves are since the valves are, for those of us who aren't brass players listening, there's
yeah,
the valves are redirecting the air,
right,
and that is inherently kind of a probably the most I'm going to guess the most disturbing part of the air column, most disturbed part of the air column.
right,
So, most people feel Americans for sure, and probably a lot of probably some Germans too would say that their pistons play their pistons are very stable. And I wonder too about that if that affects the Germans tend to play with not very much vibrato. I found at least at the time I was there,
right.
and it may be that's just that certainly a wide vibrato on a rotary might be more dangerous or uncomfortable, and
You
the
skid out
heaviness
of
of the heaviness of the instrument maybe is also not conducive to it. But then again, the music that in the states that we play the rotary on is like anything German that's Brahms or earlier,
right,
and maybe Bruckner and even Mahler, depending on how comfortable the Americans are on those horns. So uh, that music kind of has a serious quality that lends itself to minimal vibrato.
Right.
Um,
Is it, at least in the U.S., right? I mean, we start kids on the piston. And,
yeah.
I guess that probably means that it sells they will sell piston trumpets a lot more than,
Mhm.
rotary. And that, is there any reason why we start kids on piston instead of rotary?
Well, I
Or is
think
it just the
this
way it is?
and the reason our whole brass band tradition went with piston trumpets is that that they are easier to manufacture. They lend themselves more to like
Right,
assembly line kind of manufacture. So, now you can get a student model piston trumpet for not a lot of money. And
right,
there's really no way to I don't in the States you just can't get a rotary valve trumpet that's intended as to be a student trumpet.
right.
I don't know if they make them in Germany, but I think the kids in Germany are also starting on
Piston.
piston trumpets,
Right,
probably. And the thing about their program, they have a completely different start because
right,
their their public school they don't have a music program at their public school generally. Generally, they have a music program. The irony is that their music education is privatized or is well, that's not even true because I think these music schools that where kids go to take lessons have
right,
some may have some public funding as well.
right,
But the there are music schools and kids who want to study music do that outside of school. And then there's the posant corps, which are these posant corps actually translates directly to mean trombone choir, but it's a brass choir.
right, right.
So the churches, a lot of them have posant corps, and almost all the brass players I knew in Germany started that one of their first ensembles was the posant corps at some church or other,
Right.
um, playing along with the hymns and so there are probably fewer kids that actually get an instrument in their hands in Germany per
Right.
capita.
Wow.
But then the ones that do have gone to a little bit of trouble to make it happen.
Right.
I mean that's true too in the public schools here in the States, but there's so the students who are doing it are doing it of more of their own initiative in that
Right.
it's not right there for them at the public
I
school.
mean,
So
the irony is sometimes when things are harder to attain, you
mhm.
actually would treasure it a little bit more. Then
Yeah,
it was
it
just
gauge
like,
better.
oh, it's just like, oh, well, it's just readily available. You'd be like, well, that's gonna be here tomorrow. And,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
and that is the band programs in the States. A lot of kids,
right,
you lose most of them in the first 2 years.
right, right.
Um,
At the college level,
oh,
when you're
with
when,
anything,
right.
soccer too or whatever. Yeah, uh, and
So
those private schools, those schools do provide work for. You can get a degree in pedagogy and some kind of brass pedagogy,
right,
which is not public school teaching. Rather, it's a certificate that qualifies you to teach at these
right,
schools in Germany.
right,
And so a lot of people do that. I mean, everybody's got um, Posaune Corps gig where they're directing, an ensemble on Sundays, and then they're teaching at some local school
right, right,
until they either get an orchestra job or something else, until they're making money some other way.
right, right.
Um,
So
and
yeah, at the college level, when you were on with the Fulbright, so you have a huge dose of American style teaching, and then you go over there for the more German style teaching. Is there a difference between the two, or are they pretty much coming from the same place, or how does that?
I didn't, and I can't really speak very much to the academic uh, components of teaching, but I can talk about the studio,
Right,
what it was like to be in a studio.
right,
Uh, and my impression was that if you're a full professor if you have a full-time professor job at a decent music school in Germany,
right,
that it's a fantastic job. Like they don't have, I don't believe they're I think they have a lot of latitude as far as who they admit
right,
and I don't see that they have to answer to a department to the degree that you do in the States, or that you have to if the financial aspect was and administrative aspects were a big part of the job, I didn't see it that often.
Right.
Um, so I mean, I think the difference too is that at colleges in the States, uh, often it's now people are doing what I'm doing, which is they get a doctorate of some kind and then they get a job at a 4-year college.
Right.
At in Germany, there's so many more orchestras per capita that most of the college professors have some kind of, if they're teaching in a conservatory, they have some kind of orchestra or performance credit that's they're already kind of they have a huge degree of success
Right.
because you could be the principal in a B orchestra in Germany and you would never get the job that like my professor had.
Right.
He had played at a really high level at so those jobs are maybe it's one of the best jobs you could have as a musician.
Right.
I think they get meddled with by their administration less. But again, those are memories that are 10 years old and coming from just the trumpet studio and talking to others about their situation. So the programs are different too, though. There's a music degree, which is sort of like a bachelor's degree
Right.
that involves some academics requirements and a couple of recitals. The recitals are a really big deal. The recitals are like things that your recital is supposed to be really perfect. Like you can definitely fail on your recital
Right.
in the German schools more so than in the States. And there's a performer's certificate, which is really hard to get into and really hard to finish. Where you have uh, like you're doing an hour and a half recital at the end. And there's a lot of there's a really high that's a very demanding program and almost no brass players get into those programs. And then there's like a chamber music major and pedagogy majors.
Like chamber music major.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a um, that's a lot of people do that.
Right.
So, and I applied to and got into that program. Um,
Well, it's tougher
and
for brass players, right? Because yeah,
because
we
I need to
do.
extend my stay, that's why I did that. But
Right.
yeah,
Well, it's tougher
yeah,
for brass players, right? Because yeah, we do have plenty of a repertoire, but compared to strings, we
yeah,
have like almost nothing. Just relatively, we have like very few pieces.
yeah. We've got
That
just
heck, and then talk about like
mm-hmm,
pieces that people know about. There's like basically none. I mean, there's the E walls,
yeah,
and there are the other few. Maybe even Malcolm Arnold, and then for brass players, some of the John Stevens stuff is pretty good, pretty wonderful, and I think we're down to like the MTT street songs, that kind of repertoire. But I mean, it's not like a Beethoven string quartet that
yeah.
everybody
Oh,
knows about,
exactly. Forget it. We just don't have
right?
those pieces. So we play arrangements and transcriptions, and but the modern repertoire is, I think composers are getting attracted to it,
Right.
and brass players will actually, composers who are listening will actually play your pieces. If you compose a brass quintet for us, we won't say no. We got to, we haven't played all the Shostakovich quintets yet. We're sure not going to play your quintet.
Yeah,
Um,
and for us, I
but a
think.
string quartet would be inclined to say that probably.
Well, yeah, and the thing for us, the problem a lot of times for us is, well, this is going to be an awful thing to say, but we don't have a lot of brass, say, quintet pieces that are written by big name composers, like you just mentioned Shostakovich. I don't
Yeah.
remember seeing a Shostakovich brass quintet, right?
No,
There's
it
no
was
Vaughan
not a
Williams
thing by the
brass
time he
quintet,
died.
and then all the brass instruments are not the modern were not really constituted until what the mid 19th century, right? So Mozart's out, Beethoven's out, not even don't even mention like Gluck and
Yeah,
Rossini, all those guys, they're out. So it's really tough for us because we don't have a brass quintet that is like written specifically for brass quintet by Brahms.
right.
You
There's
know,
no like idiom defining. There's no ensemble defining repertoire.
right?
Uh, the pieces, we got a lot of pieces by amateur composers of the era who then wrote in the historical style pretty maybe pretty well. Ewald is a good example.
Right.
He was an amateur, and he wrote some good pieces. Like they're worth performing,
It's
but not worth
pretty.
performing. Not they don't make the core of a repertoire.
Right. Right.
So, but I mean that's the thing that attracts me to quintet playing.
Right.
Um, is that the repertoire is actually it's getting better and broadening, and it's interesting, and they can do things that composers can do things that maybe the the brass quintet can be very homogeneous, or you can get mutes involved
Right.
and a few tech sort of
Well, it's one of these.
unusual techniques, and you can and some interesting things can happen.
Right,
So
it's one of these lemon and lemonade thing, right? If well, then if you don't have a tradition of this, then the advantage is you can, go the other direction, as in
yeah,
the expectation is different or zero, then
yeah.
you're free more free to explore, you
Well,
know.
and I think that's where like the young students I'm around now don't prioritize brass quintet playing as much because they don't realize or they're not acknowledging that they're going to end up doing a lot of it when they get out of school if they keep playing at all.
Yeah,
The quintet is something they're going to need to be able to cope with.
right,
Um, and so they're focused on orchestral repertoire because it is great music. We have Mahler and we have Shostakovich and we have oh Waverville. So
yeah,
we have great music, and you got to go to the orchestra repertoire for that in general, and so they don't want to look at what's going on. So if you want to find great music for brass quintet, it's probably been written in the last 20 years because the ensemble wasn't established
right,
until like the 1960s or 70s.
right,
And there was a slew of really mediocre pieces written for brass quintet in those years that we still dig out of the libraries and we give them a read and you and I have been at those readings where we
just for
read it
fun.
and then we write on the folder turd and we refile it. That's what we do. Because you can't tell, and if especially modern music, sometimes you can't tell what it is looking at the score, and you give it a try.
Right, right.
Um,
Yeah. So now, in terms of now, at least in the tuba world, I've noticed that American playings are the expectation of the sound is different. As in, at least for tuba, um, we when you mention an American sound, you think
mhm,
for tuba it's big and fat.
mhm,
In most cases in orchestral, and a lot of times guys would use as huge of a tuba as possible in
mhm.
American orchestras. When you go over to Europe, you would see guys use. When I say guys, I mean person. You would use because then tuba you got into this thing about a lot of times you always picture a that's a totally different topic. A dude instead of a woman.
Yeah,
Let's not even get into that. But in Europe, in European orchestras, sometimes you see they use a tiny E flat to play the
yeah,
tuba part,
yeah.
whereas the same part will be played with the huge big fat C in American orchestras, right?
Mhm.
Now, in terms of the sound philosophy, do you detect any differences in the trumpet world between America and Europe?
My memories are clearer of the differences in trumpet sound than in the brass section in general because I know that balance and color and concept of brass section sound
Right.
it's different within Europe and even within Germany, but and within the German speaking world, and there's a lot of so in the United States we've probably homogenized in the last since the basically since recorded and now especially with the internet since recorded music has become increasingly more available and everybody hears the top whoever your top five orchestras are in the
Right.
states. There's a
Right.
lot of emulation and
Right. So people expect because they hear that so much through
yeah,
like recorded media, they expect when they go to concert, they expect that sound. You
right,
know?
right. And in Germany, I think there's probably better preservation of
Right.
uh, regional differences. Um, but they're probably experiencing the same thing because now if you live in southern Germany, you're just as likely to listen to the an orchestra from Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, as you are to listen to recordings at least of
Right.
orchestras from your own region. So that stuff's and furthermore, like the studio I was in, there was were trumpet players from a bunch of different countries, and um, so I didn't feel like I was in a German studio per se,
Right.
but there were definitely German uh, uh, players in the studio who were more German in their playing. Uh,
And what do you mean by that?
um, I think and actually when I was trying to prepare orchestra auditions over there, I found that uh, the integrity of the whole arc of the phrase
Right.
was a really high priority,
Okay.
more so than more so than dealing with the oh specific features of a phrase. You were always looking for this arc
Right.
to the phrase,
Right.
and so the playing was in a sense more I mean I perceived it as more restrained and rational and
They go for
about
this.
proportion
Right.
and again pretty conservative about vibrato.
Right.
The attack is uh, tends to not be as pointed as say French musicians um, or from Latin from Spain, Italy, France,
Right.
and the States. I think and that again might come back to to the uh, um, the instruments. I've been told that players who make their whole careers on rotary valve instruments tend to retire earlier
Right.
because the instrument is in some ways it's harder to project on.
Right.
The sound has a lot of mass, but
Right.
uh, doesn't project in the same way. So it's hard to put these things in words. But I encourage anybody
Yeah.
who's interested to YouTube, especially right now. There's a these orchestras are all public institutions, so they tend to post a lot of public videos, and the public radio and public television in Germany, it's the media is much more of a public entity, and so there's a lot of access, and that gets to the audiences in Germany.
Right.
Um, I mean, the difference is I love the audiences there. People are, it's an integral part of their lives.
Right.
They, for middle class educated people, um, music's a big deal. They acknowledge that some of the pillars of Western music came out of their culture, maybe 100 miles from where they are, or maybe right in their own town,
Right.
and that'll give you a regional pride and and an interest at least in and to have that same connection here in the States. We might have that feeling. Some people might have that feeling for jazz, but somehow it's not even. It's deeper than that for them there. So you go to music festivals and.
Right.
Yeah, like I remember the music festival I played, there was a chamber music concert that went like 7 hours. And they just, so people came in and left but it was the Schleswig-Holstein festival. And so that particular that particular weekend concert, if anybody wanted to play chamber music, they were invited to get themselves on the program.
Right.
The level of players was pretty high, and they put together some really, I mean, it was a beautiful concert, but people stuck it out. There were people there who were there all 7 hours, So
And these are classical music,
yeah,
like
yeah, and
Western
that was
classical
right.
music.
But I have to say the jazz. I heard some great jazz when I was in Germany. I think the conception of a German who perceives him or herself as educated, will feel obligated to explore music in a way that goes beyond
Yeah.
pop music.
Right.
So, and maybe, probably the parents feel they need to expose the kids, and it's not hard to do that because the orchestras are publicly funded, so the tickets are not that expensive.
Right.
Um, and the halls, you've got these old halls that are, have been there for 250 years or were rebuilt after the war to look like they have been.
Right.
So it's the concert going is a different experience too. So
Just a
I think
traditional thing. Because I mean it's a little weird. I mean again, it's any kind of generalization is dangerous, I guess. But well, one way to say it is if music or classical music or the study of music, if we got 1/10 of the fanaticism of sports in this
Yeah,
country, we will be fine, you know.
yeah, yeah.
But
The
I think
industry.
it's really weird because what I have observed really is because we have plenty of orchestra labor disputes around the country lately, and I
Yeah,
think the latest one is Minnesota. They just cancel all the classical concerts to April. So it's not a
yeah.
good situation to be in.
Mhm.
Uh, we have a lot of devotees of classical music in this country for sure. I mean, we still have a lot of people who would get season tickets. We still have a lot of people who would go to concert, but it's not. At least to me, orchestras are not. I mean, you can argue otherwise, and I have plenty of friends who would argue with me on this, but I don't really think it's an integral part of the culture anymore. The orchestra. Now, the
Yeah,
music. Now, there are two things. The music itself, yes, the music will live through recordings, through kids studying it, kids through people just listening to it, and through movies, through
yeah,
other means. But the orchestra itself as an institution, I think we are on really dangerous ground here because it's not really an integral part of a community, not that much anymore.
yeah. And it's not. It's a really expensive model for making music
Right,
when people are equally satisfied to go out and hear a band of 4 to 5 members
right.
in a casual setting where they can drink and have them some chicken fingers or whatever, and you know that's it's a different evening, but and you can hear great music in that setting. I mean, that's
Right.
there's great art music you can hear that way. Um, but to fund 120 to 150 people for large orchestra concerts, it's a pretty hard thing.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that there are many constraints because just the way it is, when classical music is happening, you can't be having somebody sell peanuts on the aisles,
yeah,
right? You just can't do that.
yeah,
Yes, you can argue that there is Hollywood Bowl, but it's a different setting and we can argue about that. But there are constraints in terms of the performances. It's probably not a good idea to play, have a classical music concert in a stadium that sits like 60,000 people. I mean, probably number one, that
right.
wouldn't sell out. But number two, just the acoustics would just not be so good, So they
Yeah,
are
you'd end up with a pop concert no matter what you do.
right.
You can play Brahms like that, but you're going to
Right.
have to amplify it.
And then and
And
then you
yeah,
you you just brought it up too. There's always this struggle between what to program, and an
Mhm.
orchestra has to have like two brains working. I mean, there has to be sometimes three side of the brains working, the classical stuff, and then they will have another series with the pop music, popular stuff, movie
yeah,
stuff, and then they will have another side of it that's the education. They send people out to do outreach and stuff like that. So it's a really complex operation. But
yeah.
the thing is, it's almost if man, this is going to upset a lot of people. But say, if just pick a town, just somewhere close. If the if the Seattle Symphony somehow went away, I don't think
Mhm.
you would get the same kind of outcry as the Seattle Seahawks moving to Portland.
Oh,
You
right.
know,
Forget it. No, not
not even
under.
close.
No, no, I'm afraid not. And I don't. I think the major cities will retain their orchestras, and what'll end up happening is they'll just get raises almost never.
Right.
So that's
And
why these
they
labor disputes are so bitter because they haven't had raises in years and
right.
years.
They'll go to a per service thing instead of a salary
Yeah,
situation,
yeah,
and they would probably just like other corporate America, it would just cut they would cut down on benefit and no pension, that sort of
yeah.
situation.
Things get eroded,
Right.
and
Right.
but most big urban centers, there's enough money around that it's worth it to someone
Right.
to keep things going, um, whether in a reduced form or the New York Philharmonic's uh, probably going to be solvent for the foreseeable future. The
Right.
Boston Symphony. These aren't the institutions that. Um,
They do have a tradition in the name, you know. I
but if
mean,
the Spokane Symphony, for instance, were to go under,
yeah.
then in Spokane to hear a concert, um, to hear live music, it would have a huge impact on accessibility of music for that city and that region.
Right.
But again, the outcry might not be. It would be one of those things where life just got a little worse for everybody and nobody notices right away.
Yeah.
You notice in a real gradual way. Um,
I mean,
so
the situation here in Spokane is, the I guess we can talk about it now. It's over, but we had some disputes over here, and the orchestra was on strike. But there were a lot of support from the community. I mean, there
yeah.
were benefit concerts for the musicians, and there were like overwhelming support.
Mm,
Um, but that's great to see. But it's not in the long term. That's not sustainable. As in, your support is coming from maybe 1% of the population of the city,
yes. Yeah.
and then out of that 1%, you would figure like only maybe 1/10 of those are very hardcore supportive.
Yeah.
And the really bad news too is the chances are that 1/10 of a 1% of really hardcore support, they are of the older demographic.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, there would be one day that these people will be no longer with us. You know.
Right. And that so that the money's going to stop flowing at
Right.
least from that generation.
Yeah, I always think outreach is the prime most important. Because you need to share this with especially the kids, because they would be your future. In the art. And
Well, and that's when they're open to it.
right,
If
but
you if they don't go until they're adults, they're unlikely to really connect with it.
yeah, but see, it's one of these things that I think, if we just rely on the private sector, that's not
Yep.
really too much feasible, because in short term, there is no profit in this. It's not
Right.
like
Yeah.
right. It's not like you send a quintet out from an orchestra and you play for the kids, and then the next day the kids will buy tickets, and then you'll see like tenfold the profit. It doesn't show up on a spreadsheet like that. So they run on a different system in Germany, don't they?
Right. I mean, that's where the tradition is so long. The institutions are so old. They're it just would be it would be like shutting down one of their old cathedrals to shut down an orchestra. And the thing is, in hard financial times, they have made cuts and they've um, melded two orchestras together.
Right.
That's what happens there sometimes. But the orchestra gigs there are also tend to be uh, well, it's of course the benefits are better. The stability of the orchestra of the pay is you're a public employee when you play in the orchestra
Right.
in Germany and in much of the EU, and there's public funding there are grants and
Right.
there's sort of an arts budget which we effectively don't have. Like the NEA is no orchestra is substantially reliant on the NEA. I mean, if the NEA is eventually finally killed by wrong-headed people, then
Right.
we will. Then that won't be the thing that kills the orchestra. The things that'll make live art music go away will be cultural and to some degree economic, but not. But we're not in a situation where the NEA can really bail anybody out, because
Right.
there's
No.
just not enough money.
Yeah.
And when people try to make the NEA into a political football, it's laughable, because the amount of money involved
Right.
is just
It's 1/10 of
is
1/10 or
laughable.
something. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's a different. There's a feeling of community ownership of the music in in Germany, and for young Germans, being a professional, classically trained musician, or even, I had a friend in the studio whose intention was to play new music primarily,
Right.
and he actually ended up with a weird dual specialty where he was learning to play the Baroque trumpet really well, so he would be playing with organizations that are just starting to happen here in the States, which are
Right.
historical, like
Like,
period instrument
that,
ensembles.
is that
Uh,
let's give him a plug. The Seattle Trumpet Consort. Is that?
yeah, hey guys, anybody listening
Let's
from a
give him a
Seattle trumpet
plug.
concert?
Let's give him a
Yeah.
plug.
So these kind of ensembles, that play the music on the original instruments,
Right.
those are the best recordings being made of that music for sure.
Oh yeah.
And the Europeans are ahead of us in that because they've been doing it longer. And again, it probably gets back to their cultural ownership of that music. They have a stronger feeling about Bach and Haydn um,
Yeah.
than Americans do, for good reason.
Right. Right.
So, uh, and in his career, the career that this friend of mine was planning on, it was a realistic thing to do. And in the States, that's getting into the realm of dream,
Right. Right.
So, so I wonder how that's happened. It's been 10 years by now. Helmut's probably, either made it or doing something else, or who knows.
Right.
Um, I should check that out.
Well, but I mean, it's man, this is another one today. But I think when musicians, I think it's naive to say that politics has nothing to do with your craft, with music, because well, I mean, we all have to eat, and then there's the funding issue, and then a lot of times what controls the funding, what keep the the financial blood flowing. A lot of times politics.
Yeah, for
If you
sure.
have people in charge in the political level who is not keen on, or who, one, don't have any understanding of what it is, two, they just use it as a political football, like you said, just kick it around, and then at the end, they end up getting cut because for some reason, you know all spending is bad
Yeah.
to certain political faction here in this country. Then everything dried up, nothing happens, and then the next generation don't get the benefit of knowing this thing. And it's really hard to, once you kill it, it's really hard to restart something like that, especially art, because it does need time. It's not
Yeah.
it's not a microwave thing that you can just push it into a microwave and ready in 3 minutes.
Right. You can't necessarily just put something into production.
Right.
Because again, we get back to this idea of continuity and of culture, where the culture has some history and some relevance. And I think especially the politics of music funding. There's we get to local politics.
Right.
Like the federal government is not. I don't see. We're not going to get it. We're never going to get sort of the New Deal thing
No.
where performers are being where fine arts are being funded by the federal government.
Get-
And I don't know.
Right.
Maybe that's not for what should be happening in the States. Maybe, but if your mayor doesn't feel that the failure of the orchestra is reflects badly on his administration,
Right.
you know, if somebody that if an organization that makes other kinds of jobs
Right.
leaves, then the local political scene is shaken up. But it's not seen as that kind of vital.
And I can see, I mean, it is certainly a tough argument to make sometimes. If, like at a municipal level, yes, funding is very limited. And if it is between, say, taking care of the homeless or patching potholes on the street, between that versus, funding orchestras and arts, I don't know if we can actually make a convincing argument that, money should go to, arts.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to have a healthy art scene,
Yeah.
the solution is cultural.
Yeah.
And that's where the outreach stuff that is really important. The times that you and I played some of those Bellevue Philharmonic.
Yeah, the outreach ones,
School
which
concerts,
it's
yeah.
really, actually it's really fun. I really miss those.
Some of my fondest memories of the best outreach efforts I've seen. See kids really excited about
Yeah,
vibrating tubes.
that's
It's
why
great.
I don't know if we disagree here, but I do think something need to be done on the federal level.
Mhm.
In municipal level, they can only tax so much until people just just getting all upset and they will shut things down. But if anybody who has a little bit of capital to invest in this would be the federal government. If there is a fund to that the problem becomes how to administer it and how to monitor. I mean, yes, how much government oversight do you want it over art, or do they just do they trust the people that they distribute money to and who they distribute money to, and that I'm
Yeah.
sure it's going to be another big 50-gallon drums of worms. But it's all good. I think at the very least there has to be there has to be there has to be the few, as in money,
Yeah.
and then all bets are off after that. If there's
Well,
no
and that gets back to the origins of the music. But Haydn wrote his symphonies for aristocrats who paid for
right,
them,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
we're still trying to run orchestras and arts institutions in general uh, on the wallets of the aristocrats,
right, and then
and
they
it
have
can
a
be done. I mean,
oh,
we
and
know how to do that.
right,
Management kind of knows how to do that.
right,
It's a
and they
very
have
success.
agendas too. you know,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's in Rochester. We've just sort of seen that where the symphony board and fired the conductor,
hmm.
and the musicians didn't want it, and the audience didn't want it, but the board. So that this has been a big stink here, and it kind of illustrates that the money makes the decisions, and
Right,
so all the comparisons to management in corporate America and management of an arts organization. I mean, um, the parallels you could write a book.
right, right,
Okay, so and the European system's not perfect either. I'm sure. I mean,
right,
it's an easier life for musicians there, partially because of the health insurance thing. So that's a
right,
given.
yeah,
There are more jobs per capita, but of course, when something's publicly funded, then
you got right,
politics become just a built-in part, really, really directly
right,
engaged with the orchestras.
and you will have a certain. It's just statistics. You will have a certain percentage of abuse.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you
I mean,
you
I think
just you
that's
just
an assumption that you know conservatives say you'll have abuse, so don't spend the money, and liberals say you'll have abuse, accept it. You're going to have you do what you can, and you try not to. If you have a lot of sugar out, you're going to get some flies. So you figure out how to minimize it, and then you accept that there's waste in any large scale, like a large scale expansion of the NEA.
right,
Is going to be would for instance be there would be a guarantee of some waste, and
right,
there would be exposés on Fox News, and that would be fine. But in at the end of the day, you look at any major federal initiative, and the kind of waste or graft or
right.
mismanagement is the numbers are spectacular. So
I can just see it. There will be a thing on Fox News, especially trumpet players spending too much taxpayers' money on mouthpieces. You know,
yeah, why do I have to have I just bought a $300 mouthpiece for the first time in my life. I've never spent that kind of bread on a mouthpiece. And
whoa,
why do I have to have that when I could have got the $30 mouthpiece for,
get the plastic one, $18.
yeah, yeah. You can see through it, you can get it in purple.
Well, I mean, in the risk of turning this into a political podcast, so we should move on to the to the last topic of the day. I guess I just want to talk to you a little bit about what you're doing right now at Eastman. You're at the doctorate program, and is there now you've been around for a long time. You've been professional for a long time, and I always think that music is an ever learning process. That's why it's good. That's why it's fun, but that's why it's frustrating at the same time. So, are there stuff that you picked up recently that you haven't even thought of in the past many years that you've been doing this?
Um, well, I think the approach of my studio teacher to playing the instrument's been really very good for me specifically. I kind of had an idea of what he was about getting. That's not a coincidence.
Right.
Even among the the top tier of trumpet professors in the country. I knew ahead of time he was well suited to what I was hoping to do, and his view of what music, how music's made, and what it's good for,
Right.
Aligns with. So that's all been, as I expected, a really one. It'll be an important experience of my life. I'll look back on
Right.
as such. And it's just strange to be. Of course, it's strange to be middle aged at a school where, last night I was at a brass quintet rehearsal.
Right.
We're going to play on one of the guys' recitals, and I started listing things that none of them had done yet.
Yeah.
Like and saying things like, you mean none of you have lost a parent yet? You're all, none of you have been divorced yet? I haven't played in a quintet where nobody was divorced in like 15 years, 20 years. Yeah, none of you filed for bankruptcy yet? I mean, when was the last time I played in a brass quintet where nobody had filed for bankruptcy? So it's they're at the outset of it. The level of playing at the Eastman School is really high. They get around the instruments really well,
Right.
and they're pretty sophisticated. I mean, what people used to say is, oh, Eastman, Juilliard students, these students, they are technically, they get around the horns great, but they don't have maturity yet. That's what these kids actually, they're pretty sophisticated. Like their access to music, to recorded music, and to first-rate teaching, and to information in general. It's we're getting a great generation of. It's the irony. We're getting the greatest maybe one of the great maybe the great generation of musicians. Who knows?
Right.
They're definitely. The level is higher than I think it was the first time I was, went into a music school in 1991.
Yeah.
So, I think I think the irony is that the kids are playing this well, and they're this into it, and they're so, they've got a much better attitude than me. And then when they get out, the scene is harder than it was in 1991 too,
Right.
for sure.
Right.
For sure, they're all trying to prepare for orchestra auditions, and so were we. I mean, I see the same thing. Some of the things that are the same are the most shocking. That, everybody in the trumpet studio, all the performance majors, are their plan is to get an orchestra job,
Right.
And they're just aren't any. Like
Right.
I mean, the number of auditions per year, there'll be a half dozen per year, maybe.
Yeah.
So a few of them will, and by a few I mean a couple of them will get orchestra jobs,
Right.
and the rest will have to do
Military, probably, maybe.
well, in the military band jobs, yeah, they'll and a lot of them will freelance. A lot of them will end up doing something else altogether. At Eastman, the undergrads, a lot of them are spending spectacular amounts of money on school.
Right. Right. And the other
so
thing,
that's the other thing,
the other
they
thing
come out with huge debts.
right. The other thing with studying music is you do have to spend a lot of money on material.
Yeah.
It's like versus I mean, I don't think this is a problem that, sociology majors or philosophy majors or physics or chemistry majors would face, as in, you do, even before you start, you are down like $15,000 just for the thing,
Yeah.
just for the instrument. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is right, but it's a little bit low. The entry fee is a little bit lower for trumpet guys versus tuba guys. I mean, 15,000. That's I mean,
Well,
that's.
but we trumpet players get into having 4 to 6
Yeah.
instruments that we have to have.
You do.
And even then, we might not make it to the grand total that a tuba can be, and then that doesn't approach what a cello can be, right? I mean,
Right. That can go.
So that's
like
the other
crazy.
So, and most of the undergrads, most of the students in general at Eastman
Right.
are middle class to upper middle class. It's
Right.
it's a pretty
Right.
that's just fact. And although there are a few that are there on full tuition, full ride, it does happen.
Right.
And
we, I always think, call me whatever. I always think we need to have more of that. Because, because the reality of it is, you cannot ask somebody to sacrifice that much. You're not going to tell them, okay, you're going to be, for the next 20 or 30 years, you're going to be paying off your education, but we're not sure you're going to have a job. You know,
Yeah.
after after you done with your entrance, you know, procedures. You know,
Yeah.
so it's a tough sell, and I
Yeah.
can't believe I just used the word sale, but you know, it's tough to convince, you know, kids to go into this, and I usually, yeah, actually, for a responsible professional musicians or professional teacher, it's hard to convince ourselves to convince the up and coming student to do that.
Yeah,
Because
I would
because
never encourage a private school
right, if you
student
don't
of
tell
mine to,
I
yeah,
at least for me, if you don't tell them the truth, you're not being responsible. You
yeah.
know, you have to tell them, you know, what this really is. Yeah, you know, I mean, they're, yeah, you know, if things works, it's the most wonderful thing in the world. But you know, I mean, but you know, it's not all gravy. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that many. Uh, I think the majority of people who study music as their primary profession end up pretty unhappy for long stretches of their lives. And a few, I mean, and that's the irony of studying at a fine music school in the States
right,
is that the teachers have often they usually don't go through what the students are going to go through professionally.
right,
Um, Usually they've had a fairly successful career from a fairly young age, because otherwise they wouldn't arrive at. They're not going to end up the trumpet professor at Eastman
right,
unless they've had a long successful career before they get the job. So their route is by definition different.
right, right,
Um, so I don't know. I mean, in this era, what it comes around to is if the kid's
They-
got a lot of talent and a lot of drive and is absolutely dead set on doing it.
yeah,
In Germany and the EU, it's still not uh, psychological suicide, but in the States, it's a very dire thing to take on,
right,
and I would discourage virtually anybody. There are some people who I think have a level of for whom a musical career has an element of ease in terms of performance that I could see. You know, I mean, you study music for the personal transformation,
right,
and that's clearly worth it. But in our society right now, the idea of studying art music as your sole vocational training is just bananas. It's just
yeah,
nuts.
and
You
there's
don't want to. You should not do that.
yeah, and accidents are almost impossible. I mean, you know, accidents by accident, I'm saying, you know, in football, right? There are guys who just walk on at the
Yeah.
college level. They probably play in high school. They didn't get recruited. You know, if you just walk on to the team, try out, hey, you make it to the team and you make it to the NFL. You know, in music, that almost never happened.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You do in order to make a job in the classical arts, at least,
Right.
you have to go to a conservatory,
Right.
and you have to study with a certain kind of teacher, and you have to. There
For
are all these
years.
have-tos,
Yeah.
but it's really like I remember seeing the documentary about the sea turtles where they lay a ton of eggs in the sand. And that was like a shock for me as an 8-year-old. It was like one of the most horrifying things I ever saw when I saw this
Yeah.
on whatever the nature documentary. And I see these little cute, adorable turtles coming out of the sand, popping out, and they're just like ants on the beach if you look at them from above.
Right, right.
And incredibly small, some incredibly small proportion of them make it to the water,
Right.
and the rest of them all get swooped up by seagulls and other things that.
You're scaring the kids.
Carry
Matt.
them up high and drop them on stones and then eat their guts. And it's a feast for the birds,
Right.
but it's a raw deal if you're born a sea turtle,
Yeah.
because you're probably not going to make it, and you might be the fastest. But if the seagull has his eye on you, you might want it more. If the seagull has his eye on you, so yeah, I mean, if you want to be a performer, then. The advice I give to my students is to be a diversified performer,
Right, right,
to be not an exclusively classical performer,
right, right.
and also to not rely on it for your
Right.
for your livelihood.
Any
Oh, and I'm sorry about that. You're to the audience at home. You're hearing my Samoyed who's getting antsy for a walk.
Yeah.
I know, Ari. Hush, girl. Good girl. Yeah.
Any
So,
recent revelation in terms of playing, in terms of music?
I think I had the phenomenon where I studied with this teacher for now a year and a half,
Right.
and I wasn't using my recorder that all much. I wasn't recording myself that much, and then I started again.
Right.
And so I had this weird episode where I had some new information, some new ideas, and things were going in the right direction. And then I put the tape recorder on it, and it made things a lot clearer. So had I done that 6 months before, it might have helped me to realize more of what I was taking in
Right.
earlier. So everybody's got to keep their tape recorder close because
Right.
it won't lie to you.
Especially for intonation and articulation. A lot of times you're sitting behind the horn, you really can't. Sometimes you can't feel it, you can't hear it.
Yeah, it's different in different rooms, and but that's. Oh, and I think at my stage of the game, it's good for me to get back to the idea. I got to keep coming back to the idea that that music, that performance should be an act of giving to the audience, rather than proving my value as a human being, or rather than proving my status as a performer, or whatever other ego-driven motivations. That there've been a few times when I gotten out of that kind of ego-driven mentality, and gotten into a mentality that was more about contributing to the situation I was in, and then in those situations I played a hell of a lot better. So I should probably try to, you end up working on yourself in the course of working on your playing, and that's part of what keeps a lot of us in it, for better or worse.
That's awesome. Well, Matt, we have known each other for a long time, and love talking to you always. Because just this show is music podcast, and then we drive into politics, and then we drive into a reality check, and then we talk about the technical aspects, and we talk about the music, and then after that you threw in a little bit of nature, nature with the turtle. So always nice to talk to you, and thanks again for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Hopefully you'll come back and talk to us soon. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, man. And that is my long conversation with trumpeter Matthew Swihart. I hope you have as much fun listening to it as we had as much fun taping the show. Again, we are very good friends, and we used to play together a lot in the Seattle area, and we had a lot of fun during our days there together. Look him up. So again, the music you're going to hear on these two shows, 6A and 6B, is performed by Matthew, and they're written by composer Greg Bartholomew. He's a Seattle-based composer, and I'm going to post their links with the show on Facebook and on our Podbean page, so you can find them. Again, if you like our show, please help us out by telling your friends and family about us, and also find us on Facebook. Send us an email if you want to talk to us, and also find us on iTunes and subscribe to our show there. I also need to thank our distributor, Open Sky Radio, in San Francisco, California. Thanks, guys, for all your help. And also thank our distributor in Hong Kong, 2012 Colombo. They turned our show into YouTube format, so it's easier to toss around on Facebook, and it's easier to tell people about us. So, until next time, thanks again for listening to Reasonably Ad Lib, and hopefully see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.